He had lived alone for 8 years, speaking only to his horses in the wind. But when a group of 10 Apache women arrived at his gate during a thunderous night, drenched and desperate, Tobias Redmond was forced to confront the most difficult decision he'd faced in a long time. Because the men chasing them were already near enough to see the faint glow of firelight flickering through his windowpanes. Rain slammed against the wooden shutters with the force of hammer blows, each drop loud enough to drown out thoughts and strong enough to remind any sane man why doors stayed locked when storms like this rolled through. Tobias was seated in front of the hearth, fixing a worn-out bridle by the fire's glow, when a sharp knock rattled the front door. It wasn't a neighbor's knock. It was hurried, urgent, the sound of desperation. His hands froze mid-stitch. Nobody visited the Redmond ranch anymore. He'd made sure of that. After everything that happened, the world beyond his land had been reduced to a memory he chose not to revisit. The knock returned, louder now, followed by voices. A language he knew well, but hadn't heard in nearly a decade. Apache. His pulse jumped. The last time he'd heard that language, his wife and little girl were still alive. The last time someone knocked at night, he'd been forced to bury his family before dawn. His gaze drifted to the rifle above the mantel, muscle memory telling him to reach for it. But then, something about those voices stopped him cold. They weren't battle cries nor demands. They sounded like pleas. He listened more closely. The wind carried fragments of their words, clipped and strained. That wasn't how warriors announced themselves. Carefully he approached the door, footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. Through the thick oak, the voices became clearer. Women's voices, hurried, low, fearful. One rose above the rest, speaking halting English with a cadence like stone grinding against stone. "Please, we know you are there. Let us stay, just until morning." Tobias placed his hand flat against the door, feeling the tremble of their voices through the wood. After 8 years alone, he'd learned to rely on instinct, and something deep in his gut told him this wasn't about the women. It was about whatever they were running from. The kind of danger that didn't knock, it hunted. He thought of Sarah, how she'd always believed in second chances, and scolded him for keeping the world at bay. She used to say mercy is what makes us human, but Sarah was gone, and the people who killed her had worn friendly faces when they first showed up. Another voice spoke, closer this time, probably with her cheek pressed to the door. "They're coming. If you leave us here, we won't survive. And when they find our bodies on your land, they won't let you live either." Tobias stared at the heavy iron bar that had stayed locked across his door for nearly a decade. Not once had he moved it for anyone, not even old friends who'd come looking for him in the early days. But that voice didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a warning. And something about it made the air feel heavier. Somewhere out there, in the pitch-dark hills beyond his fence line, someone was closing in. And if he didn't act now, whatever solitude he had left would be swallowed whole. His hand closed around the iron bar, and though it was no heavier than before, it felt like lifting a mountain as he slid it from its brackets, for the first time in 8 long years. 8 years of rust and fear seemed to fight against his decision, but the desperation in that woman's voice had cut through every layer of isolation he'd built, like a blade through paper. The door groaned open, revealing a scene that would burn itself into Tobias Redmond's memory until the day he died. 10 Apache women stood clustered on his porch, soaked to the bone, their clothes torn and stained, some bleeding through bandages too wet to hold. The youngest couldn't have been older than 15, clutching a small bundle against her chest that stirred faintly, a baby gasping against the cold. The eldest had silver strands in her dark hair and eyes that carried the weight of more loss than one life should hold. But it was the woman who had spoken through the door who held Tobias's attention like a vice. She stood apart, her posture rigid with pride, despite the exhaustion tugging at her shoulders. A thin cut bled above one brow, her dress ripped at the seam, but her eyes didn't waver when they met his. "I am Ayana," she said, her voice deliberate, every word chosen with care. "These are my daughters, my sisters, my people. We've been fleeing for 3 days. Tobias tried to respond, but the words got caught somewhere between instinct and disbelief. He wanted to ask where they'd come from, why they were alone, and what devils were chasing them. But the pale lips of the child in the girl's arms silenced everything. Some truths didn't need to be spoken. "Come in," he heard himself say, stepping aside. One by one, they moved past him like ghosts, trailing dampness and silence into the small firelit room that had been his haven from the outside world. The house felt suddenly smaller, filled not just with people, but with the scent of rain, blood, and a kind of fear that spoke of men not far behind. Ayana was the last to step in, and as she passed, she leaned close enough for her breath to reach his skin. "The ones chasing us, they're not far, an hour at most, and they won't stop until they've erased us." Tobias shut the door and replaced the iron bar, not that it would stop bullets. The line he'd drawn between himself and the world had been crossed, not with violence, but with purpose. And now there would be a price. There always was. "Why?" he asked, turning to her. "Why are they after you?" Her stare didn't falter, but something behind it flickered. "Maybe, or memory, because we didn't lie down and die when they burned our homes, because we ran when they expected us to kneel. Because one of their officers did things to my youngest sister that no one would believe if we survived to tell it." Tobias felt his gut twist. He'd met men like that in his past. Soldiers who hid behind rank and uniform while doing things that stripped others of their humanity. "How many are coming?" he asked, already knowing it would be too many. "Maybe more," led by a man named Morrison. "He's been sweeping through the territories under the pretense of keeping peace, but he's silencing witnesses, not enemies." Tobias crossed the room and looked through the slit in his shutters, watching the storm paint the darkness into thicker shadows. He saw nothing, but that didn't ease the pressure building in his chest. Men like Morrison didn't leave tracks. They didn't need to. Their bullets did the talking. Behind him, the women huddled near the fire, tending to wounds, whispering reassurances to the youngest among them. They didn't look like warriors, but survival had a way of forging something stronger than armor. Tobias turned to Ayana and said, "There's a cellar beneath the kitchen. Stone foundation. Entrance is hidden. It might hold all of you, but it'll be cramped." She gave a slow shake of her head. "If they search and we're discovered, you'll die with us. If they see an empty house, maybe they'll believe you had nothing to do with us. We won't drag you into war with the US Army." Tobias almost smirked at the irony. "That conversation's about 8 years too late, ma'am. I became their enemy the day I walked away from what they did to my wife and daughter. The only thing I'm figuring now is whether we run or make them pay for showing up here." There was a shift in Ayana's expression. A flicker, part surprise, part recognition, and maybe even something that looked like faith. Outside, the storm was easing, and with its retreat went the shield of noise that had masked their trail. From the distance, faint but unmistakable, came the wet shuffle of hooves through mud and the low voices of men who thought they were moments from a victory. It was the sound of death drawing near. Tobias moved quickly, the way men do when they've lived too long expecting the worst. He grabbed his rifle and a tin of ammo from the cabinet, checking the action without a word. But as he turned back toward the others, he froze. Something had changed. Ayana was no longer the soaked, battered figure who had pleaded at his threshold. She stood tall, commanding, a knife in her hand catching the firelight like it was part of her. Around her, the others moved with sudden precision, no longer huddled victims, but trained fighters ready for what was coming. Some held small blades they'd hidden under their clothes. Others adjusted their stance near doorways and windows, clearly practiced in the art of ambush. "You're not what you seemed," Tobias said quietly, realization washing over him. "We never were," Yana replied, her voice as sharp as the blade in her palm. "But sometimes it's wiser to let men believe what they want to believe. Captain Morrison thinks he's tracking frightened women who'll cry and beg. He's about to learn otherwise." The girl holding the infant moved without a word toward the back, two others following as if on cue. No one needed to be told where to go. They already knew. Tobias saw it now. He hadn't offered sanctuary to survivors. He'd opened his door to warriors who'd chosen this battleground with purpose. "How many have you killed?" he asked, straight to the point. Ayana met his eyes without flinching. "Enough to know Morrison's men won't be the first to mistake Apache women for easy prey, and likely not the last. But tonight, they'll learn why that's a mistake. Outside, the voices were louder now, men issuing orders, spreading out, getting ready to strike. Tobias counted at least 6, maybe more. Trained, confident, but strangers in land that didn't belong to them, hunting targets they didn't understand. There's a cellar, he said again. Hyana's response was immediate. We hide, they hunt. We run, they follow. But if we finish it here, tonight, it ends. For the first time in nearly a decade, Tobias felt the icy calm that settled before chaos. The stillness before survival made everything simple. These women hadn't stumbled into his life. They'd chosen this place, this moment, because they knew the kind of man he'd once been and what he was still capable of. "What do you need from me?" he asked, his voice low and ready. Hyana smiled, and there was nothing soft in it. "Captain Morrison expects terrified women. Instead, he'll find us. But when his men see a white rancher fighting alongside Apache, they'll hesitate. And in a battle like this, hesitation is fatal." A horse snorted near the front porch, followed by the steady thud of boots splashing through wet ground. Someone was circling the house, testing boundaries, preparing to strike. It wouldn't be long now. Tobias slid the bolt on his rifle, feeling the click as a round chambered smooth and ready. In the back of his mind, Sarah's voice whispered like it always had in moments like this, reminding him that compassion was what separated them from the beasts. But tonight he understood something he hadn't before. Sometimes mercy wears a hardened face and speaks through fire. "There's something else," Hyana murmured, her tone low but steady. "If we make it through tonight, you can't stay here. Morrison's death won't go unnoticed. There'll be questions, people sent to investigate. They'll come looking for who helped us." Tobias gave a slow nod. He'd accepted that risk the moment he lifted the latch on his door. 8 years of quiet solitude were unraveling fast, but maybe that was the point. Maybe he'd been silent long enough. Outside, a voice tore through the rain, loud, entitled, and sure of its own power. "I know you're in there. Come out now and this will be over quick." Morrison, he'd arrived, but what he didn't know was that tonight's chase would end differently. At the front window, Tobias steadied his rifle, while Hyana and 3 of her fighters moved soundlessly through the main room, blending into the flickering shadows like they were part of the timber itself. The rest had vanished deeper into the house, setting up crossfire lanes and fallback points. This wasn't panic, it was precision. They hadn't run to his door on instinct, they'd come with purpose. Morrison's voice barked again, harsher now. "These women are wanted fugitives. Open the door or we treat you as a traitor to the United States." Through the narrow slats of the shutter, Tobias counted figures shifting in the rain, soldiers fanning out to cover all exits, flanking the sides, classic maneuvering for containment. But they were working from the wrong script. They thought this was a soft target, a broken man and a handful of terrified women. That miscalculation would cost them everything. Hyana materialized at his side like smoke, her breath barely brushing the air. "The one by your barn, that's Blake. He watched them burn my home with my husband still inside. The one near your well, Hayes, he's the one who held down my sister." Her voice faltered, but only for a heartbeat. She didn't need to say more. Tobias felt a cold knot form in his chest, the same grim fury that had been dormant for years rising like a tide. These weren't soldiers. They were monsters in uniform, and monsters weren't reasoned with. "How do you want to play it?" he asked, his voice steel. "Morrison will want the front," she said. "He always does. Wants to see the fear. His men will breach from the sides and rear, thinking they'll find women begging and a rancher who'll surrender." She handed him a polished shard of mirror, its surface gleaming faintly. "When you see the flash, take Morrison, leave the rest to us." Tobias opened his mouth to ask what the signal would be, but was cut off by an unexpected voice from outside, nervous, younger, uncertain. "Captain, maybe we should just sweep the house and move on. Could be just some old rancher riding out the storm." Morrison's laugh was harsh and cold. "Private Wilson, those tracks stop at this house. 10 women on foot, bleeding, moving fast. They're in there, and so is whatever fool decided to stand between them and my orders. We go in, my way." Tobias heard the telltale clicks, safeties off, hammers cocked. It was happening, right now. And if you were Tobias, what would you have done? step into the open and reason with men who had already chosen blood over mercy, or stand with the warriors who had turned his quiet exile into a last stand? I want to know. Tell me in the comments, because what Tobias did next drew the line between justice and slaughter. The front door exploded open with a brutal crack as Morrison kicked it in, rifle up, eyes scanning for weakness. What he found instead was a Winchester locked onto his chest, held by a rancher who hadn't trembled in 8 years. For a fraction of a second, confusion crossed Morrison's face. This wasn't the scene he'd imagined. That hesitation was all it took. The mirror in Tobias' hand caught the firelight and cast a brief flare through the room. That was the signal, and the storm that had once masked the soldiers' approach now muffled the sounds of their downfall. Silent blades flashed, shadows struck. The wet thud of vengeance came swift and close. The soldiers barely had time to understand before steel met flesh. Morrison blinked, and that blink was his last moment of control. Tobias' finger tensed on the trigger, but before the shot rang out, Iana emerged behind Morrison like smoke with a purpose. "For my sister," she whispered, and drove the blade home beneath his ribs. Morrison dropped his weapon, hands scrambling for breath that wouldn't come. But Iana wanted him to see, wanted him to know who had ended him. And for every woman you thought too broken to fight back, as Morrison collapsed, a new sound pierced the night, the thunder of hooves, more voices shouting through the rain. Tobias' stomach turned to stone. Through the shattered doorway, he saw the glow of torches bobbing in the dark, not just a few, a wave. Morrison had been the scout. The real threat was only just arriving. Iana withdrew her blade, her breath steady, but her eyes searching the dark as more riders approached. Her women re-emerged from the shadows, bloodied but unshaken, and one gave a quick count. 15, maybe 20. They heard the shot. "They know we are here." Tobias stared out into the rain. The choice loomed again, fight and fall, or surrender and rot. But as he looked at the warriors who had chosen his home as their last ground, he remembered the man he used to be, the man Sarah loved. "The storm cellar," he said, urgency tightening his voice. "Not to hide, to outlast, to strike again when they least expect it." Iana hesitated, eyes narrowing. "We can't outrun a force that size. They will hunt us across 3 territories." "We're not running," Tobias replied as he stepped toward a dusty cupboard he hadn't touched in nearly a decade. Inside, wrapped in weather-stained cloth, lay remnants of a past life, sticks of dynamite, coils of fuse, and the precision tools of a man who once shaped landscapes with explosions, first for railroads, then for reasons less noble. "My ranch is perched atop a slope," he explained, hands moving with the confidence of long-buried muscle memory. "Natural runoff cuts down both sides. When spring floods hit, that water has to go somewhere." Iana's eyes lit with recognition. "The dam." Tobias gave a grim nod. "I built it to keep the floodwaters back. But if we take it down during this storm," he glanced toward the distant glow of torches weaving through the trees, "that valley becomes a grave. 10 feet of water, fast and merciless." Iana finished his thought. "They won't outrun it, but we'd be destroying your home, your land." Tobias looked around the space that had served as his cave, his cage. Morrison's lifeless form lay sprawled across the floorboards, a symbol of everything Tobias had tried to shut out. "Home ain't wood and dirt," he said softly. "It's what you choose to fight for, and tonight I'm choosing life. For you, for them, for whatever chance this world still got." Outside, the storm softened, and in that silence came sharp shouts, boots slapping mud, orders barked from men who were realizing this wouldn't be the easy kill they expected. One of the women stepped into the room, the baby she carried now wide-eyed and awake, alert to the tension like it had lived through this war before. Then came a voice from beyond the shattered doorway, loud and brutal. "Lieutenant Morrison is dead. You've got one chance. Step out now or we torch everything." Iana turned to Tobias, a flicker of worry in her eyes. "If we do this, there's no undoing it. You'll be hunted. You'll never be safe again." Tobias hefted the dynamite and tucked his rifle under one arm. "Lady, I've been living like I was already gone. Tonight, I stopped dying and start doing something that matters." But just as they were ready to slip through the back, a sound cut through the wind like ice to the spine. A baby's cry, not the one in their arms, another, out there in the dark, somewhere near the soldiers. A child. Tobias stopped, everything in him going still. It wasn't a trick. He knew that sound. Real fear has a sound, and someone, some twisted fool, had brought their infant into this mess, believing this would be quick. Yana's grip locked around his wrist. Could be bait. Tobias shook his head. That cry was no tactic. It was terror, raw and small and real. The baby doesn't know whose side it's on. It just knows it's in danger. We can't flood that valley, not anymore. Then we all die, one of the women snapped. My child deserves to live, too. Tobias didn't argue. She was right. But there were lines you didn't cross, not if you wanted to live with what was left of your soul. He set the dynamite down slowly. There's another way. Riskier, but we all walk away. Yana stared at him, her eyes narrowed. Make them believe we're cornered. They'll send a few inside to mop us up, keep the rest guarding the horses and supplies. And whoever brought that baby, that's one less rifle to aim our way. So maybe it's 3-1, but that's only if they're expecting a fight. This won't be a fight, it'll be a reckoning. Tobias opened another cabinet, this one housing different weapons. Iron caltrops designed to shred hooves and soles, razor wire so thin it vanished in shadow, pressure triggers that had collected more limbs than game during the war. He looked at Yana. 8 years ago, I turned this land into a tomb because I was afraid to die. Tonight, it becomes something else. A place where cowards learn what happens when they mistake silence for weakness. Tonight, we're going to use those defenses to make sure other people live. Outside, voices barked back and forth as someone assumed command. Likely Morrison's second in command, organizing squads, assigning routes, and laying out a plan that made sense only if they believed they were hunting helpless targets. They had numbers, discipline, and training, but they didn't know this land, didn't feel it under their boots the way Tobias did. Yana leaned in, eyes sharp. How do we split their strength? We let them see what they expect, a desperate last stand. We barricade the front, make it loud, messy. They'll rush in thinking we're panicked and trapped. Half will come crashing toward the noise. The rest will linger behind, protecting the exit path. And then Tobias' smile was the kind that made even seasoned men uneasy. Then we teach them the difference between chasing victims and facing people with nothing left to lose. The plan was simple in concept, reckless in execution. Yana and 4 women would hold the front, raising hell to draw attention. Meanwhile, Tobias and the others would maneuver through paths he alone had mapped, aiming to ambush the rear force and rescue the child whose faint cry still echoed through the storm. As they readied themselves, Yana's expression turned grave. If this fails, they'll turn us into monsters, use our bodies as propaganda to justify more bloodshed. And if we wait, Tobias countered. Then a child dies for someone else's sins, and every one of you dies for choosing survival. There's no clean path here, just bad and worse. The baby's whimper rang out again, thinner now, frayed with exhaustion, and Tobias felt time bleeding out around them. They moved fast. Yana led her unit to the front, drawing attention with gunfire and chaos that mimicked a cornered group ready to make its last stand. Tobias, drenched and cold, slipped out the back with his team, the ground slick beneath their feet, every step a risk. As they approached the enemy's rear, guided by the flicker of torchlight and murmured commands, Tobias felt something go wrong in his gut. The child wasn't with the reserve soldiers. It was closer, far too close, trapped in the space between the battle lines. He adjusted course, the danger now far greater than expected. The wagon was parked in no man's land, a supply cart partially hidden by shadow. Next to it knelt a woman, not a soldier, dressed in patched clothes soaked through, whispering frantically to the baby in her arms. She wasn't part of the fight, just another soul caught in the wrong place. Tobias motioned for the women behind him to stop and wait. Slipping forward through the rain, he heard her voice, calm, trying to quiet the child while knowing she had nowhere to run. From the house came the sounds of the ruse, shouts, splintering wood, windows breaking. It was working. Soldiers surged toward the front, leaving the wagon exposed. But exposed still meant guarded. 3 armed men hovered nearby, rifles slung, unaware that the real fight was about to erupt from the shadows. He made his decision. Rising from behind cover, Tobias strode toward the wagon with deliberate calm, his rifle held at a neutral angle but ready to fire. One of the nearby guards spotted him instantly and lifted his weapon, but Tobias spoke first, his voice steady and authoritative. "Lieutenant Morrison sent me to check on the civilians," he said smoothly. The fabricated order bought him just enough time to close the distance. Cloaked in shadows and dressed in his dark coat, Tobias could easily be mistaken for one of their own in the low light. By the time doubt crept into the guard's expression, it was too late. Tobias swung his rifle in a tight arc and knocked the man unconscious, letting his body slump into the mud. The young woman cradling the baby flinched as he approached, fear written in every line of her face. She couldn't have been older than 19, her eyes sunken with exhaustion, skin blotched with cold and stress. "Please," she whispered, shielding the child with her body. "Don't hurt her, she's innocent." "So are you," Tobias said gently. "What's your name?" Mary Hendricks. I cook for them, wash their clothes." "The captain said we were just arresting some thieves, said there wouldn't be trouble." Tobias's jaw tightened. Morrison had lied to everyone, even his own. "Mary, listen to me. I can get you and your child out of this, but you need to trust me. Run toward those trees when you hear gunfire. Stay low and follow the creek. It leads to a trading post 5 miles south. Tell them Tobias Redmond sent you." Her eyes searched his face for a moment. Then she nodded, holding her baby tighter. "And you?" she asked, but Tobias didn't answer because danger had just returned. One of the remaining guards noticed the downed man and shouted, lifting his rifle. But from the dark, Tobias's allies moved like ghosts, Apache warriors with vengeance in their bones. The fight was swift and silent. These men weren't facing frightened villagers. They were up against survivors who had prepared for this moment with absolute precision. In seconds, the skirmish was over, and Mary disappeared into the storm, clutching her baby as she vanished toward hope. Their brief triumph, however, was shattered by a new sound, worse than gunfire: silence, the kind of silence that carries dread. And then a voice boomed out of the darkness, low and commanding. "This is Colonel Bradley of the United States Army. You are completely surrounded. Surrender immediately or we'll burn you alive and hang whoever's left." Tobias felt every muscle tighten. Morrison hadn't been the head of the snake, he'd just been the lure. The true danger had always been out there, watching, letting others bleed while the trap was laid. Torches lit up the woods, spreading in a wide arc around the ranch. This wasn't a dozen riders, it was a full-scale military deployment. The realization hit hard. They hadn't escaped the fight, they'd stepped into its center, but then a voice rang out from the house, Ayana's voice. "Tobias, we have Bradley's son." And just like that, the balance shifted. Silence returned and loaded. Even the wind seemed to stop. When Colonel Bradley spoke again, there was a new edge in his tone. Uncertainty, fear. "Let the boy go, we can work something out." Ayana's reply sliced through the night. "There's nothing to discuss. There's only justice. Your men destroyed our village, slaughtered our families, and did even worse. Now you'll finally answer for it." Tobias crept back toward the cabin, navigating a battlefield of scattered soldiers and weapons abandoned in haste. As he neared the structure, the scale of what had happened came into view. Ayana's side had won, but not without cost. 2 Apache women lay motionless, their lives traded for a fragile edge of survival. Inside the dim room, the air was thick with tension and smoke. Ayana stood behind a pale-faced young officer in a Union uniform, a glinting blade pressed tightly against his neck. The kid couldn't have been more than 19. His sharp jawline and haunted eyes unmistakably inherited from his father, Colonel Bradley. But where Bradley's voice had the weight of command, his son radiated only panic. He tried to speak, but Ayana's knife dug closer, silencing him with a single drop of blood. "He slipped in from the rear," Ayana said, her voice cold. "Thought he was clever, catching us off guard while the others distracted us at the front. Instead, he stumbled straight into our hands." Tobias stepped closer, locking eyes with the trembling lieutenant. "How old are you?" 19, the boy whispered. Tobias's face hardened. "That's the same age as the cook's daughter, the one running through the dark with her babe because your father turned her into a target." That's the same age as girls your men dragged from their homes and didn't let live. He paused, then asked, "Did you even know what Captain Morrison was really doing out there?" The boy looked stunned, his expression shifting as truth cut deeper than any blade. "I thought we were neutralizing raiders. My father told me they were attacking settlers, that we were defending civilians." Tobias clenched his jaw. "He lied to you," Hyana said quietly. "We raised crops and families. We didn't fire a shot. But peaceful natives don't justify bigger battalions or new funding." Bradley's voice boomed again from outside, this time laced with strain. "60 men surround you. Give me my son, and I'll grant you safe passage to the border." Tobias scoffed, empty promises from a man who built a legacy on lies and fire. But then he looked again at the young officer and saw something unexpected. Regret, realization. The boy wasn't just scared, he was waking up. "There's another path," Tobias said to Hyana. "He doesn't have to die. His ignorance doesn't excuse him, but his voice might bury the people who did this." A colonel's son speaking the truth in court could unravel everything. "You want me to turn on my father?" the boy asked, barely audible. "I want you to stop lying. To everyone, including yourself," Tobias replied. "Are you brave enough for that?" Before the boy could answer, the sound of hooves thundered closer. Orders barked, torches flared, but these were not Bradley's men. Through the shattered doorway came new shapes in unfamiliar uniforms. Federal marshals, territorial enforcers. Someone had finally taken notice. And now, as the storm faded, Tobias realized the impossible might be within reach. Not just survival, but justice, though it wouldn't come without sacrifice. The truth couldn't stay buried. Justice had to rise, and men who thought themselves untouchable would finally be held accountable. The young lieutenant stared at the blade, reflecting his own shaken face, then glanced at Tobias and Hyana before looking toward the line of federal reinforcements cresting the hill. "What do you want me to say?" he whispered, voice trembling but steady enough. 6 hours later, dawn spilled across Tobias Redmond's land in bold streaks of red and gold. Colors that felt fitting for a night that had shattered more than just silence. Investigators listened to the lieutenant's statement with grim faces, writing down testimony that reached far beyond Morrison's brutality, and exposed a web of corruption that climbed all the way to government offices in the territorial capital. Colonel Bradley left the property in shackles, his career and reputation broken, not by gunfire, but by his own son's decision to speak. The women who had survived were promised protection and reparations, though no law or coin could mend the grief of those they'd lost. Tobias stood outside what was left of his cabin, watching Hyana gather her people for the journey ahead. The children were safe. The Apache infant and the cook's daughter had both survived, but at a painful cost. "Where are you headed?" he asked gently. Hyana nodded toward the hills, to kin who fled before the raids reached them. "We'll start over, but not here. Too much was taken from this land." Her eyes studied him quietly. "And you, your past is gone. What comes next?" Tobias looked toward the western horizon. "The man I was, he stayed hidden for 8 years, but he died last night. I think it's time I find someplace that needs hands that can build and a heart that still knows how to protect." Hyana gave a rare, soft smile. "That woman, Mary Hendricks, she and her child will need someone to watch over them on the road to Denver. Not a safe path alone." Tobias nodded. His first steps as a man reborn wouldn't be toward a new home, but toward ensuring others reached theirs. As Hyana led her people north in search of healing, and Tobias turned west in search of meaning, the sun lifted higher over blood-soaked earth that had seen horror and a measure of justice. What ended that night wasn't just a battle. It was a chapter, and what began was something harder to name: redemption. In time, rumors would spread of 10 Apache women and a forgotten rancher who defied an army and didn't flinch. But those who lived it knew the story wasn't about heroes or glory. It was about the moment when a man must choose between silence and standing up. And when that moment comes, the only thing that matters is choosing to be human. Now tap the video on your screen to hear another story, even more gripping than this one with a twist you'll never see coming. Go on, hit play now.